Today's guest is Carolyne Savini. She's been an executive recruiter, leadership coaching, executive coaching expert, and a super interesting part of her career has included succession planning at a major corporation. All those things sort of work together, but we're going to hear straight from Carolyne and how they work together and how she got from early days of executive recruiting to succession planning and leadership coaching. Carolyne, can't thank you enough for joining the show. Welcome to the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Carl, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Our pleasure. It's going to be great. With that little sort of bit at the open, give us a sense of what got you into executive recruiting. You obviously started somewhere. And then along the way, you had clearly mentors, leaders, in our parlance, bosses or boss, who influenced you, who you respected and trusted. And the reverse was also true. And that led to you learning and taking those learnings into the workplace.
Yeah. Doesn't everyone as a child grow up wanting to be an executive recruiter?
Good question.
What the heck? How did that happen, right? Yeah, I feel like it's one of those professions you just fall into. I definitely was not exposed to it at all. In fact, I was in grad school and my initial goal was to be an athletic director, a college athletic director. And so I, figuratively speaking, just sort of fell into it because I decided college athletics wasn't going to be the path for me when I was in grad school, and got connected to an alumnus of my grad program who owned an executive search firm. And I joined, and the rest was history. I thought it was going to be an 18-month gig, and it ended up being the start of a full-on.
Right. So executive recruiting, and we're learning sort of as we go. There are those in the marketplace that think and believe that executive recruiters and executive recruitment firms really are kind of a black box. Don't sort of understand how it works. You get a call, you send a CV, you maybe have, if you're lucky, a 15-minute or 30-minute call with the recruiter, and then more often than not, the line goes dead. So what happens in your world that sort of, at least those that are listening to this can, get level set about the role and the importance of executive recruiting, in the workplace?
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, I would start by saying, consider an executive recruiter as a broker. Their job is just to pass the candidate on to the decision maker. And so that black box that you're referring to, I think, is the part where whether they're retained, an external partner that an organization is bringing in to handle a search, or in-house, because I've worn both hats. I've been retained and in-house before. People in those roles are still serving someone else who's ultimately going to be making the decision. Sometimes there's not always clarity around, what does my hiring manager actually want? What does this organization actually need or want? And sometimes it can be very clear, but not necessarily clear on a resume. So the opposite side is there's two sides of the coin of really having clarity around what a hiring manager wants, and then really having clarity around what does a candidate bring. So those 15-minute or 30-minute screener calls are really to understand what someone might bring experience-wise to the organization, and do they really fit the role. I could talk separately about how to ace an interview. That's a different conversation, maybe for a different time. But because I have a lot of opinions on that, and I've coached a lot of people candidates up in nailing their interviews.
Right. Well, hugely worthwhile for those that are either a candidate for a job or think they might be looking for a job. And the role of executive recruitment is an important one, albeit many times misunderstood. So you said an interesting thing to me. You've been on both sides of the desk. You've been retained search with, you work for a search firm. Client A, B, or C retains the firm. You get the assignment, and you go through your exercise of understanding optimally exactly what the hiring manager is looking for, so you can do the best job as a broker, a good broker, bringing qualified candidates that meet those needs. The flip side of that coin is doing it from the inside. If knowing what you know now, would you have a preference, inside or outside, and what are the differences?
Yeah. I'd say the biggest differences are inside. It depends on how big the organization is. So coming from Activision Blizzard, we were 14,000 people at our largest. And that was across the corporate entity and the 3 business units that the organization had before it was acquired by Microsoft. The pros on being in that experience was my stakeholders were always pretty much the same, working with the same HR leaders, working with the same executives. The searches would be different, the roles that we'd be recruiting would be different, but the people remain the same. So really got to was embedded in the organization and fully understood what people wanted and what people needed and how things worked from the inside, and understood what was going on inside. When in retained search, people might not always the recruiters may not always understand what's actually going on inside. So that was probably the biggest challenge on the search firm side. But the flip side is the variety, because you could be working with one organization and 2 of their competitors, and they're all your clients. That's totally possible. So there's a lot of variety. You could be working on different types of roles: a head of HR for one organization, CFO for another, a CEO for another. There's a lot of variety when it comes to retained search. Yeah.
Got it. So in those early years after grad school, you connect with an alum gets you in recruiting. But the recruiting at that point, as I understand it, was pretty much focused on the world of sport, right?
Yeah.
And national governing bodies, pro teams, leagues, those kinds of entities.
Yeah, exactly.
So you spent, I don't know, you tell me, X number of years doing that. And in those formative years, was there an individual or maybe a couple of individuals that you could look back and point to as the best boss, quote unquote, or leader or mentor that you had? And if so, who and what did you learn from him or her along the way?
Yeah, well, so the owner of the firm where I worked was a man named Len Perna, and he's still around today. And what I really credit Len for is a couple of different things. One is the culture that he created within the company, because it was a small company. It's part of what kept me there in the early years, because I loved what this group of, we were all young people at the time, relatively speaking. I think most of us were in our 20s or early 30s, and what we were building and growing, and to be a part of it. So he allowed us into it, or at least feeling like we were shaping the growth and trajectory of the company. So that's the first thing I would point to. My cat.
Hey.
The first thing that I would point to with Len was how much interest he kind of took in our opinions, and bringing us into meetings that if it was in an organization that was 10 times or 50 times that size, we might not have. I personally probably I wouldn't have gotten the same exposure.
Right. And well, that's great to hear. I know Len and have known him for some number of years. That said, did you find in your smallish group that your size might have come into play as you pitched potential clients? I mean, we all know who the bigs are, right? It's the Spencer Stewarts, it's the Korn Ferries, it's the Russell Reynolds. I mean, the list goes on. Did you run into a scale problem, I guess is the best way to say it?
Well, the short answer is probably yes, and I'm not quite sure. So from on one side, I don't know did we lose searches because we were viewed as the small firm? Maybe every once in a while, but I don't think it in any way inhibited it didn't inhibit our success.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, there's always a place, and I think a really great niche is, the boutique firm that is nimble, agile, doesn't have a lot of baggage, so to speak, and can be far more efficient and effective in many instances than the larger, more cumbersome firms. And there's clearly room for both in the marketplace. So Len's your early mentor, and as you grew with Len, and at what point, or was there a point where you made a conscious decision, okay, hey, listen, I know everything I need to know about executive search on the outside. I now would like to try it on the inside. Or did that just all of a sudden show up on your desktop and you went, oh, well, that's interesting?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, we were adding to our team, and I was looking at different LinkedIn profiles of people to recruit to bring into the company, and I remember seeing some profiles of people that had been in retained search and then went in house, and maybe a company was like Google or I don't know, you know, some a big company like
Right.
that, and I thought, well, that would be kind of cool. I never thought I would want to do something like that someday because I was a sports person. I went to grad school to work in sports, and I'm in sports all my life. But you know what? Maybe there's more to life than sports. So, so that kind of opened my eyes to it. And fast forward a couple of years, I got a call. I took it, and that's what led me to Activision Blizzard.
So you spent, I don't know, how many years with Len, and then you went straight to Activision?
Yeah, no. So I had a couple of I had 12 years at Turnkey, and right before my second son was born, I ended up taking a year off. So I had two kids at the time. I have three now, but I had two at the time, and then when I went back to work, I went to a Turnkey competitor, which is Nolan Partners, and I was ultimately there for 18 months, but like right around the time the pandemic hit in early 2020, in 2020, I got a call from Activision and eventually joined them.
Right. Well, that's interesting to me because you migrate away from ostensibly what's a live event world, right? Sports, it's live events. And those stopped. But large format game playing on laptops or phones exploded because people couldn't do other stuff or weren't allowed to do other stuff, however you want to characterize it. So, Activision Blizzard at that time feels to me, and you're going to help us get clarity on it, like it was poised for a real growth spurt in terms of fans, in terms of users, in terms of the user experience, in terms of growing, a multiplayer platform.
Yeah, I mean, you can track it just like any other streaming company at the time. You can track it. You can track it by their stock price.
Right.
Yeah, it exploded. It exploded in the pandemic. You could argue it even exploded through getting acquired by Microsoft. It's done very, very well.
Right. So listen, sport is entertainment, period. Fan bases, content consumption, both live and via both linear and streaming television platforms. Differences and similarities from sport, quote unquote, to Activision Blizzard?
Well, yes. In the most basic sense, yes. Just how business is done from a pro sports team to a league versus the company that is Activision Blizzard, and what they prioritized and how their business grows and how it makes money. It's like vastly different.
Right.
But the common denominator across everything is people, which is where I came from. So that's what made the transition really easy for me personally, professionally. But it was also a fascinating business to dive into and understand pretty quickly. It's not that complicated, but
Right.
but very fascinating.
So on the inside, so you migrate over, still in executive search and recruitment.
Correct.
Is that then part of the HR or human resources function?
Yeah, exactly.
See, so as you quote unquote onboarded there, how did you find the culture, the leadership? Because there's a fascinating part of this for me, because you start there in recruitment, executive search. At what point, and I want to hear about the people that helped guide you at Activision Blizzard, but you migrate from straight recruitment into leadership development and succession planning. That to me is an amazing pivot. So you're pretty unique in that regard, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. So, let's see. the first question around going in there in HR culture. So my function was a function of HR. So I lived in the HR world. Those were like my people, so to speak. And there was about 500 or so, less than 600 in HR globally at Activision Blizzard across all business units. So in big companies like that, and I don't know from where all of your listeners come, like what types of industries they come from, but in big companies, Microsoft or Activision Blizzard at the time certainly isn't the biggest company out there, 14,000 people. There's a lot bigger companies, but there's a lot of sort of microcosms within these organizations. So I was in the HR world, a part of the larger company. I'd say like we went through ups and downs as an organization while I was there. 2020, a lot of highs, and we hit some roadblocks in 2021 as an organization, which impacted HR. Yeah, culturally, it was one of struggling to find the right words. Fascinating is probably the best word I can use, because I was I've described this before as being both a participant and an observer of what happened there. I was in it, and also like it's almost like an outer body experience of watching what was going on, thinking, wow, that's really interesting that that's happening. Sort of learning from it all. Lots of lessons in leadership, lots of lessons in culture. Where does culture come from? How does it impact an organization, a final product, etc. And you asked about like how do you go from executive recruiting to these other areas. So it had to do with what was happening in our business. We got hit by one of the business units got hit by some really negative headlines around culture, specifically culture of harassment, discrimination. Google July 2021 Blizzard Entertainment, and it's anyone that's interested can find out about it. So I got really curious around, well, how does that stuff actually happen? And it was more of a curiosity, intellectual, philosophical curiosity, like what was going on around here that this type of behavior was allowed. And then it led me to considering leadership and how are we developing and supporting our leaders at the executive level. And that combined with, while we're turning over a lot of people in leadership roles, and my team was responsible for replacing a lot of them and filling these positions and even creating new positions to support different focuses of the business. How are we considering anyone internally? And if people are, and so I was involved in conversations where, are there any people that we should be considering for these roles? Yes, there are. No, they're not. Yes, this person, like, they're not ready yet, but we might consider them later. So then my next question is, well, what would they need in order to be considered ready now? And that's all part of the life cycle of succession planning. And there was someone in the organization that was ultimately responsible for it, but also had a lot on their plate and didn't have support in succession planning. So I raised my hand to take on a secondment role in succession planning, and then also requested to take on specifically the sort of be the central expert, if you will, around executive coaching and supporting our executives and leaders from a development standpoint. So that's the long, short story.
Well, and you and I know that it's a lot longer story, but we won't go there at the moment. The question then becomes, as a practical matter, you're asking questions, presumably not in a vacuum. You're talking to other folks up the line and saying, hey, we had this, quasi disaster in a division from a cultural perspective. How does that happen? Why does that happen? What guardrails do we have in place that can mitigate that going forward? And if none, or they're murky, shouldn't we begin to frame how best to not just identify potential internal leadership candidates, but dovetailing that into succession planning and coaching so that, I guess as a practical matter, you identify early in one's career leadership capability or leadership attributes or something like that. And I want you to sort of elaborate on that. And then help guide that individual in the context of the broader company mission and your role within that company mission.
Yeah. So what's the question in all that?
The question is, what happened and why? And were there frameworks in place to help mitigate that? If not, did you help articulate and create those frameworks in a team? And then what falls out of a framework is early identification of leadership talent. How do you coach that individual up to become the leader? Lastly, as that relates to succession planning, that's a matrix, right? So how do all those puzzle pieces fit together?
Yeah. So on the first question of what happened and why, let's say this is me sort of opining more than like diagnosing this is exactly what happened. So I'll make that disclaimer. Um, I don't I don't know that there was a pervasive culture of like always do the right thing, or this is what it means to have leadership values, what it means to be a leader and what leadership values are in this organization. And by the way, like there's a lot of organizations and places out there that mistake someone for being a leader when they're just responsible. I say just responsible for managing people. So that's a nuanced conversation that I don't know we have time to really dive into. But so play that out to the last part of your question. There were things being done working with consultants. So the way I'd bottom line all of it is to say that there was no real like one person whose day job and sole focus inside the company was pushing forward specifically succession planning.
Right.
And this was like the early days, and we got there. I say early days, like, and it's probably had several iterations, but when I was there in my tenure, and uh, yeah, and then we started creating the frameworks for how to identify what each position needed from a competency standpoint, from an expertise standpoint, skill based, and then characteristics, which by the way, like underpinning all of this is mostly leadership, but I walk away from my time at Activision getting really clear on leadership is not actually clear in a lot of places in a lot of organizations. So part of what I bring now with my company is supporting organizations and people, specifically people, on getting clear on what leadership is to them and how to show up as a leader and how would they know it when they saw it and things like that.
When one of our early, because you just triggered a thought here. In our earlier conversation off camera, we talked about what those attributes really are. And I suggested to you that they're from my perspective, and I sort of buy into this, and you had a slightly different view, but I want to delve into this a little bit. You can teach skills, you can teach knowledge, you can teach product knowledge sessions, you can do all that. That's right. That's what you do. There are attributes individuals bring to the party that you really can't teach, right? Character, as an example. You can say, hey, this is quote unquote what makes good character, but you can't, go in and rewire an individual. So my 5 things, and I want your take on this, because I know you have your own sort of little treasure chest of values, if you will. Character, attitude, drive, and energy, those 2 are closely related, and talent, right? We all have innate talents. Understanding what they are, this is a different story. And improving on God-given talent is also a different story. But everybody sort of has a measure of talent and all those other things. What is your take on that? And I know you've got your own sort of vision on what those things are.
Yeah. So I actually slightly disagree a little bit in that you framed it as rewiring, that you can't do that with an individual. And I would argue that if someone wants to quote unquote wire, like you just using your language, it is possible. It is absolutely possible. I know it just through the work that I do as a trained executive coach. But it just depends on whether or not someone is interested in doing that for themselves. It has to come from the individual who's going to rewire. Because if someone doesn't believe it and like, this is how I am, this is who I am, this is what I'll always be, because there's some of that too. And I will say, like, in my experience, this is where my executive recruiting experience really comes into the work that I'm doing now, which is I feel like executive recruiters are known for putting people in a box and seeing them one way, which is a snapshot in time, and people change. And so that one snapshot in time that whether it's a boss or an executive recruiter or an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, like they remember you from when 3 years ago you did this or you said that, 5 years ago this happened, but it's not the thing that makes you or shapes you. So the so that is all to say, from a rewiring standpoint, yes, it's possible, and you can actually train leadership. And like, I'll call what you distilled down into those, what you shared leading into this, as kind of like leadership attributes. You can train it, you can develop it. I don't know that any of it is truly innate. It is probably more learned behavior, and a lot of that would be luck. Like, who raised you? What kind of environment did you grow up in? What type of coaches, literal, like athletic, if you played sports, what type of coaches did you have growing up? Teachers did you have growing up? And I'm talking about at the youth level, the high school level, college, right? And then once you get into the workplace, how does that help shape and drive how you show up in an organization? That's the thing that I think a lot of superiors might see, that determine this person's got some chops, so I can put them up in front of a room, or I can put them in front of a board, or I can put them in front of the CEO, or I can put them in front of, and they'll do well. And it's possible for a lot of people to do well if they're interested. It just may take some more time than others.
Yeah, so that I actually, now listening to you, I fully agree that the requirement for rewiring, we'll continue to use that phrase, has to start with an individual's willingness and choice to change, or add to, or take some not so great things away and replace them with better things, whatever those things might be. Do you have a key group of what we'll just call attributes or leadership qualities that you look for in an individual? First question. Second question is, as you identify an individual, what are those sort of core leadership qualities you're looking to grow, enhance, improve in your leadership coaching?
So, all right. So what I'll just to distinguish, as an executive recruiter, I would have answered that probably one way. As an executive coach, leadership development champion, that's what my firm is focused on, is executive leadership and talent development. So what I focus on now is, I'm in the work that I do, I don't look for specific qualities or characteristics in people other than an interest and a willingness to grow and develop. Call it a growth mindset. If the growth mindset is there, then there's likely to be whatever change it is that anyone seeks to have for themselves. And it's just support along the way of what is it that you want to achieve in the future, and we work together in achieving that thing. As an executive recruiter, if you ask me that question wearing that hat, I'd answer it a totally different way, which is, there's a dimension of character, a dimension of substance, and a dimension of style, that when those three things come together, they usually manifest in what most people would experience as like confidence. And so, like, yes, that is the thing: character, substance, and style, which we would sort of call executive presence, like the it factor. What does that person have? Oh, they like must have executive presence. Well, what does executive presence mean? I follow this woman, Suzanne Bates, who wrote a book on it, and it's all about character, substance, and style. And then there's some subsets of each of those three things. And it like correlates into, how trustworthy are you? Does someone trust you? Do you trust yourself? How you show up in a meeting? Is it confident? Is it not confident? And there's some other, because you made a comment earlier about, I don't think you used this word exactly, but like sort of, data or quantifying it, like, can you track it? And the answer is yes, you actually can. Just have to know what to call it, and then be able to identify what you're tracking, in the area of ultimately what we're targeting as, how does one elevate their leadership?
Right. Well, I think that that statement, how does one elevate one's leadership, is really relevant for this audience, because they're aspiring, they're inspired, they're on a career track, if you will. And the essence of the whole series has been not just who is one or more of the best mentors, bosses, leaders you've ever worked for, and what did you learn from that, but more importantly, what are those takeaways that help an individual at least A, become aware of, and then B, seek to better improve, enhance, and grow. Your comment, growth mindset, is outstanding. So Suzanne Bates wrote a book called?
It is called, I have it here on my shelf somewhere, All the Leader You Can Be.
All the Leader You Can Be. Before we go on to the sort of hot 3 questions, fun stuff here, we'll include the link of Suzanne's book. It's All the Leader You Can Be, or Be the Leader
All
You
the Leader
Can
You Can Be. It's kind of heavy. It's sort of like a textbook.
That's all right. That's all right. People that want to learn, they can hit the link and buy it. I mean,
And actually, like I would add this. That's more if you like to study this stuff.
I see.
It's a good book for that. But I would also add Brene Brown to the list if your listeners have never heard of her. Pick up. Now, of course, I'm going to blank on what her last.
Well, she's not hard to find. I mean,
no, she's not hard to find. But you were sort of framing up what I thought was going to be a question, but I will say that I heard her share anecdotally that she has never met a transformed leader who has not worked with either a coach or a therapist. And I share that just because you didn't ask the question, but I thought you were going this way. The best way to learn how to level up your leadership or elevate your leadership is to seek outside support. It can be a 360 feedback. How do others see you? What are you doing or what are you not doing? What are you doing well? What is rubbing people the wrong way? Getting that outside view. It's not something that you can I want to say definitively, so 99% sure that it's not something you can just figure out on your own.
Well, I actually subscribe to that. I went through an exercise when we arrived at the name of this podcast, The Best Boss Ever, and there was a third-party agency involved. There was a version of a 360 review. Suffice it to say that one is so close to one's self, it's really hard to brand yourself, improve yourself, grow yourself, but because you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. And that third-party 360 environment is so helpful and so enlightening. It does take a willingness to be vulnerable and sort of surrender to the process and sort of give yourself over to the coach, the leadership executive, or a 360 review process, with the objective being to learn more about me and that which I don't know, so I can improve on the good parts and eliminate the bad. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I'll like dive into something another layer down, but I have come to a fundamental belief that there is no actual good or bad. Only believing it makes it so. There's something in all of it, but there might be some behaviors that are better served putting down, and some other behaviors that are better served expanding.
Right. I think everybody could buy that. That's pretty logical. Listen, this is super interesting. We could go on for a lot longer, but the tips, the guidance, the experiences that you've been through, so helpful. I think going to be a great episode for those people that choose and want to improve and learn and grow. So thank you for that, Carolyne. So we're coming up on the last bit here, and I always ask everybody the same 3 questions. So the first one is your favorite mistake. This is where there was a moment along your career path where you made a pretty obvious mistake. You messed up in a big way. What was it? What did you learn from it? And do you carry those learnings with you now?
Yes. So this was really easy for me. Diving back to when I was in college, I was the president of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So I was a swimmer in college. And I were the annual thing that our advisory committee would do was to host a party. And of course, alcohol was involved, and not everyone was of age. And I sent an email out to all the other members to share with their respective teams, and accidentally included our advisor on the email, who then shared it with the senior women's administrator in the athletic department. And so the party got canceled, of course, and everything had to stop. And so, like, how do I call this a mistake? It was like the thing that I thought I should do, because that's what we always did, the screw up. I felt very embarrassed, and I went to apologize. And just sort of owned, yes, I did this, and I own it. I know we weren't supposed to be hosting these parties and blah, blah, blah. But it was like back in the day, 20 plus years ago, where I don't know, like if you replied all to an email and you thought you deleted somebody off of it, I don't know what happened. But I learned a lot. It's like, to your point, it's just owning the mistake, admitting the mistake, and recognizing what made it a mistake, and not doing that kind of stuff again.
Yes, and yes, and yes. That's exactly right. Well, that's a good one. Embarrassing as it was then, obviously stayed with you. So the next question is really the fun one. This is the favorite live concert you've ever attended. You can go back as far as you want. That featured a female artist or a female-led band.
Florence and the Machine.
Great pick.
Yeah, she was awesome. I saw her under the Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia. It was a cool.
Wow.
Down there.
No, I'm a huge Florence fan. That's great to hear. I might go out on a limb and maybe say you might be the only one that picked Florence and the Machine in the entire 90-something episodes that we've done here, because I ask everybody the same question. Maybe one other, but that's a great call, because I'm a fan.
I've seen Stevie Nicks too, but Florence and the Machine.
Well, by the way, Stevie Nicks hits the board more often than pretty much anybody, just because she's Stevie Nicks. So the last one is, I think, really important, particularly in your career path, because you work with so many different people in very relevant ways that impact their progression on a career path. So your favorite word and why?
So I'll give you a phrase, if that's okay, because it's 2 words. It's as simple as thank you.
Love that. That's great. Thank you is probably the most relevant 2 words you can say, because how many times a day is a thank you appropriate? More than people would think. So Carolyne, I can't thank you enough for spending your time with us here. This has been great. We could have gone on for a lot longer, but your wisdom, your experience, your sort of provocative approach to leadership coaching and training, and ultimately how that dovetails into succession planning was fascinating. So I know our audience is going to get a whole lot out of this. Thank you again for joining the Best Boss Ever.
Thank you, Carl.